The tension was electric, the crowd buzzing with disbelief. What had just unfolded on court wasn't your typical tennis spat, it was a cultural storm. It began when Yelena Ostapenko, frustrated after a brutal loss, lashed out at Taylor Townsend in a way that stunned the entire stadium. Her words weren't just sharp, they were dripping with the weight of something deeper, something everyone recognized immediately: racial undertones. Townsend had just dismantled Ostapenko in straight sets, 7-5, 6-1. It wasn't even close toward the end. Taylor dominated, controlled the tempo, and sent a clear message: she was the better player that day. But instead of bowing out gracefully, Ostapenko lost her composure. She walked up to Taylor, stared her down, and said words no professional athlete should hear: "You have no class. You have no education. Let's see what happens outside the US." The reaction was instant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People knew exactly what had just been said and exactly what it meant. Because in tennis, a sport with a long, complicated history of coded language used against black women, this wasn't just trash talk. It was racially charged. And the moment it happened, the energy shifted. Taylor, though, didn't flinch. She took the high road. In her post-match interview, she repeated Ostapenko's words calmly, word for word. She told me I had no class, no education, and to wait and see what happens when we get outside the US. So, I'm looking forward to it. The way she delivered it, cool, composed, almost dismissive, showed just how unbothered she was. It was the ultimate clapback without even trying, and when she added, "I beat her in Canada, outside the US. I beat her here in New York. Let's see what else she has to say," the crowd roared. It was a dagger wrapped in elegance. Taylor had not only won the match, she'd won the narrative, but let's be clear, this wasn't just two athletes sniping after a match. This was about history. Black women in tennis have been fighting stereotypes for decades. Serena Williams was labeled angry for daring to show emotion. Venus Williams was unfairly branded as cold and unfeeling. Coco Gauff, even at her young age, has been mocked for being too cocky, simply for celebrating her victories. And now, Taylor Townsend was being hit with the same coded attacks meant to undermine not her game, but her very personhood. The online reaction was swift and fierce. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were trending everywhere. Black Twitter especially was not going to let Ostapenko off the hook. People dissected every word, pointing out the history and the weight behind the insults. One fan tweeted, "Being a sore loser and then trying to insult someone is the definition of no class." Another wrote, "Ostapenko should be fined. This is unsportsmanlike behavior, again." Others asked why the governing bodies weren't stepping in. The consensus was clear: this wasn't just bad sportsmanship. It was racially loaded disrespect. And then came Naomi Osaka. Always thoughtful, always willing to speak uncomfortable truths, Osaka was asked about the incident in her press conference. She didn't dodge. She didn't soften. She said what needed to be said: "That's one of the worst things you can say to a black tennis player in a majority white sport. I know Taylor. I know how hard she works. I know how smart she is. She's the furthest thing from uneducated." Her words cut through the noise. Osaka reminded the world that this wasn't just a personal attack on Townsend. It was part of a larger pattern, a system where black women are constantly disrespected under the guise of sportsmanship. She even hinted that Ostapenko had made shady remarks before. "If you're asking me about her history, this isn't the craziest thing she said. But this time, she picked the worst person and the worst moment. And I don't think she'll ever say it again." Osaka didn't just defend Taylor. She exposed the ugly underbelly of tennis culture, the double standards, the stereotypes, the dog whistles that have haunted black women in the sport for generations, and the fans. They were all in for Taylor. Tennis crowds aren't usually rowdy. They clap politely, sip champagne, and watch with quiet intensity. But that night was different. The crowd's energy was electric, almost celebratory, like they were part of something much bigger than a match. They weren't just cheering for a win, they were standing behind Taylor, making it clear that they saw through the coded racism and weren't going to tolerate it, but the story didn't stop there. What made this moment historic was when another name got dragged into the storm, Serena Williams. Because when people think of resilience against disrespect in tennis, they think of Serena. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Serena had lived through decades of being painted as the angry black woman, penalized for emotions that white players were praised for. She'd been fined, booed, and ridiculed, all while dominating the sport. So when Serena's name started trending alongside Taylor's and Ostapenko's, it wasn't random. It was a reminder that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was part of a continuum, the same cycle of disrespect and resilience black women in tennis have had to navigate for years. Fans began saying outright that Ostapenko should face serious consequences, maybe even suspension. Some argued that if a player of color had made such remarks, punishment would have been immediate and severe. The outrage wasn't just about protecting Taylor. It was about protecting the integrity of the sport. Because tennis has always tried to present itself as dignified, refined, above the messiness of other sports. But moments like this pull back the curtain. They show that the old prejudices, the old hierarchies, are still alive, just dressed up in different language. Taylor Townsend's calm, Osaka's honesty, and the crowd's passion turned what could have been just another ugly confrontation into a cultural flashpoint. It became about accountability, not just for one player, but for the entire sport. Would tennis finally address its racial blind spots? Or would it, once again, brush them aside under the excuse of heat of the moment? What made Taylor's response so powerful was her refusal to stoop low. She didn't yell. She didn't insult back. She let her game, her composure, and her subtle clapback do the talking. In doing so, she positioned herself not just as a winner of a match, but as a symbol of dignity in the face of disrespect, and that's why this story exploded. It wasn't just about tennis. It was about culture, about race, about fairness. It was about a young black woman standing tall against an insult designed to tear her down. It was about the community rallying around her, demanding accountability. And it was about connecting this moment to the long struggle that players like Serena, Venus, and now Coco have endured. In the end, Ostapenko's words did more than just spark outrage. They sparked a conversation that tennis has been avoiding for too long. And whether or not she faces formal punishment, her comments will follow her. Because this wasn't just a bad look. It was a revealing one. Taylor Townsend, meanwhile, walked away with more than a win. She walked away with respect, with dignity, and with the support of fans who saw her not just as an athlete, but as a woman who stood tall against ignorance. She turned a moment of hate into a moment of history. And that's something no one can take from her.